This is kind of a weird one because it's a kind of a book within the book. And so it's at one point in the book it says, this reprinted here is the entire text of Lundelhart's account of Clown Jail. And then it starts this sub-book where it's a totally different writing style. This isn't the way I write, but I had to write like Peter Lundelhart IV. And so the title of this book within the book is How I Was Imprisoned and Nearly Met My End in Clown Jail. And I don't know whether to read this in a voice or in my own voice, so I'll kind of flip back and forth a little bit. Alright. It was May of '78, and I was exploring the great American Northwest regions. While trudging through the deepest wilderness, I spotted some strange tracks, the likes of which I had never before seen. These tracks, which I estimated to be the tracks of a dozen two-legged creatures or 6 four-legged ones, were spaced out like human footfalls, but the imprints were of a size and shape I couldn't explain. They were too small to be snowshoes, and this was made even more unlikely because of the fact that it was June in the forest, and they were far too large to be the shoes of human feet. I contemplated whether they might be the footprints of the fabled beast known as Sasquatch in these regions. I followed these tracks for several miles. As will happen, day turned into dusk, and I had still not found the strange creatures who had made the tracks. I set up camp in a lovely clearing near a stream. I gathered firewood to make my fire. That being done, I pitched my tent and cooked a wonderful meal of wildflowers and pine cones that I had gathered on the day's hike. As I was preparing to eat, I heard a rustling in the nearby brush. Beavers and critters of all kinds and stripes are plentiful in these woods, but so are bears and less friendly species. I switched on my flashlight and stood up to shine in the direction from whence I heard the rustle. Through the trees, perhaps a quarter mile away, I could see the light from another campfire. Strange, thought I, for I wouldn't think that another party would venture so far into these woods. Unclipping my binoculars from my belt and holding them up to my eyes, I spotted around the campfire the most bizarre and repulsive scene I had ever had the misfortune to lay my eyes upon. I won't describe this scene in these pages for reasons that will become apparent, but it involved about a dozen circus clowns, dressed and made up in their circus finest. I didn't know whether they had seen me, but I didn't want to take any chances. If they had spent any amount of time in the woods at all, and judging by how far into the wilderness and the horrible things they were doing they surely would have seen me by now. Did they not care who saw what they were doing? No. It turned out that I was already ensnared in their devious clutches. Wanting to get out of the woods into safety, I left the fire burning, something you should never do, by the way, except in the direst of circumstances, and I left my tent and sleeping bag, not to mention my delicious supper, behind. I took with me only my canteen and my small duffel, which contained a pair of dry socks, a sweatshirt, a rainproof hat, and a tube of snakebite cream. I hadn't ventured 20 feet from my encampment when I was assaulted by perhaps 4 of the worst-smelling clowns I had ever had the displeasure of running into. They captured me, in the complete darkness, by the ankles and wrists, and they carried me to their camp. These clowns threw me into a tent filled with pamphlets and books. It appeared that I had stumbled upon some meeting of a governing body of the clowns. Before this day, I had not the slightest notion that such a thing would exist. However, it has been my experience that anywhere you have a group of people greater in number than 10, you'll have at least one among their number that feels the need to organize and legislate, and clowns are no different. Legislation and organizing bodies often result in rules and laws, and in the case of clowns, it seems that they ended up with more rules than they knew what to do with. These rules have been distributed to the clown populace through a series of pamphlets and brochures over the decades, and now this conference in the woods was being held, from what I could gather, to form more laws or to better organize the ones they already had. Being that I am strictly opposed to the formation of laws and governing bodies owing to their propensity to restrict individual liberties and freedoms, I found their legislating and debating what I could hear of it from my position tied up in the library tent, to be more offensive than the opening ceremony that I had earlier stumbled upon. I was forced to sit tied up for several hours, listening to the incipient noises of men and women who had heretofore been fully capable of operating as clowns and doing things that clowns do as they gave away their rights to an organization which they called the International Clown Court. The entire scene made my blood boil. The last order of business was for them to decide what they should do with me. I was carried out to the place near the fire that was serving as the pulpit or dais for the event, and a clown wearing a tall, curly white wig came out of a tent and stood next to me. During the next 15 minutes, I was tried and sentenced for the crime of trespassing on a top-secret meeting of the International Clown Court for the Northwest region. I have to hand it to these clowns. They don't waste time with namby-pamby notions like human rights and due process in the judicial system. It seems to me that if you must have a system of laws, it should have only the most basic of laws, and justice should be swift and certain, as it is in the natural kingdom and in the Lord's kingdom. It was unfortunate for me that I had wound up on the wrong side of such a swift and certain justice, however. I was sentenced to 1 year of imprisonment. At the time, I had no idea how miserable a place clown jail was, but I resolved to escape by any means necessary. Over the next 24 hours, I was transported in the back of an unmarked van to a location that I now know was in the suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Clown jail is located underneath a warehouse in an unsavory part of town. Upon arrival, I heard the sound of a large warehouse door and then open and then close as we entered. I was then carried out of the van, brought to an elevator, inside of which my blindfold was removed. It appeared to be a normal freight elevator with a dimmed light bulb in the roof. Upon exiting the elevator, we entered a small lobby with cinder block walls, 3 chairs, and a receptionist window, and a security door in the opposite wall from the elevator, in which the chairs were facing. The 2 guards on either side of me sat in 2 of the chairs, and I was made to sit in the middle chair. Handcuffs bound me to these 2 guards. Now, unblindfolded, I could see that both of the guards were dressed up in cheerful clown costumes, but with the only difference between them and your typical circus clown being that they wore a sad face with exaggerated frowns and giant tears painted on their cheeks. We sat silent for what must have been 30 minutes before the receptionist, also in full clown makeup, appeared in the window. She motioned for us to approach, and the guard clowns brought me to the window. I was asked to hand over my personal belongings, which the guard stripped from me and handed through the window. Included in my belongings was my patented adventurer's pocket knife, which can be obtained via mail order using the form in the back of this book. My clothing and possessions stripped from me, I was uncuffed and pushed through the door to the left of the receptionist's window, where I was given a prison uniform. The uniform consisted of giant shoes, baggy pants, and a blouse. Each item was orange, but with white polka dots of varying sizes. I put on the uniform, and then another door opened. I walked forward into a central courtyard surrounded on all sides with cages. Each cage was 8 feet by 10 feet in size and held as many as 14 clown prisoners. Although it didn't appear possible for that many adults to fit in such small spaces, somehow they did it. The noise level and smell of the place was something that no one should ever have to endure. How we doing here?
Great. 2 minutes.
All right. 2 new guards who stood next to the door through which I had walked escorted me to a cage on the far wall that already contained 8 other prisoners. The door was unlocked and I was pushed in with a mighty shove and I fell upon the floor. The other clown in the cage approached me and began to lick my skin. I later discovered that prisoners in clown jail are deprived of many of the essential nutrients that a person needs to survive, such as salt and magnesium. And you can get some of the required nutrition by licking the skin of new inmates who have not yet been starved of nutrition. My good reader, I urge you to not allow yourself to become so deprived and depraved. For your own good, please refer to the order form in the back of this book to order my scientifically formulated adventure and nutritional vitamins, which contain everything needed to keep even the most active adventurer healthy in even the most adverse circumstances. I only wish that I had these vitamins during the horrible ordeal that was to follow my initial introduction to the God-forsaken world of clown jail. After an hour of constant licking, my skin was red and raw, and the other clown prisoners had extracted every possible nutrient they could get from me. I was left naked and cold on the floor, where I fell unconscious. When I awoke, the other clowns were pacing around the room in a line while I laid in the center. I was informed that this pacing was the only exercise permitted to clown prisoners, and they would partake in it for 1 of every 3 hours during the day and night. The food served in clown prison is atrocious. I hesitate to describe it as food. Paste would be more accurate. It resembles a food that was eaten by the natives of the Pacific Islands called poi, but lacked the color, charm, and taste, such as it is, of that basic porridge. The gruel served to clown prisoners resembles tile grout in color and texture. The taste also is unlike what one would expect grout to taste like. In fact, it may have been grout that I was dining on during my stay in clown jail. The only redeeming quality of the clown jail meals was that each clown was given his own bowl of the foul grout food and his own spoon from which to eat it, rather than being served from a communal trough. One more paragraph.
Okay, yes.
Alright, after 3 days of eating this grout, sleeping on a dirt floor with no sleeping bag, and my only exercise being walking in a 4-foot diameter circle, my vitality was sapped. Sitting on the bare floor of the cell with my 7 cellmates and wearing my now filthy clown pajamas uniform, I knew only that I had to find a way to escape or I'd soon be dead.